Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Our journey tonight begins in Scotland, on a dark hilltop where an ancient fortress rises against the skyline. Edinburgh Castle. Strong and unyielding, it has stood for centuries, watching wars, betrayals, coronations, and executions. But behind its walls, history is not only written in stone and blood. It is also remembered in whispers, footsteps, and the cold touch of things unseen. Perched on Castle Rock, the fortress is impossible to miss. It dominates the city below as though it were carved by nature itself for kings and soldiers to claim. People who pass by often look up at its towers and battlements with awe, but when night falls and the streets grow quiet, the castle feels different. The air shifts, the silence deepens, and those who enter sometimes walk away with stories they cannot explain. Some say the restless spirits of Edinburgh Castle are bound to the tragedies it has witnessed. Imagine the endless clashes of Scottish clans, the long wars with England, the screams of prisoners in dark cells. Each cry, each last breath might have left something behind. And for those who have dared to explore its hidden places, the feeling of being watched never quite fades. One of the most famous legends is that of the Phantom Piper. Centuries ago, tunnels were discovered beneath the castle, leading into the heart of the city. To find out where they went, a young boy with bagpipes was sent inside. He was told to keep playing as he walked, so that the people above could follow the sound and trace his path. For a time, the haunting notes echoed up through the streets, rising and falling like a ghostly guide. But then suddenly, the music stopped. The boy never returned. Search parties went down into the tunnels, but they found nothing. No boy, no pipes, only silence. To this day, locals whisper that on still nights, the faint sound of bagpipes can be heard beneath the castle, as if the lost piper is still wandering, forever trapped underground. Another spirit is the headless drummer. His first appearance was said to have been in 1650, a time of great danger when Oliver Cromwell's forces were preparing to attack. The ghostly boy, drumming without a head, was seen by soldiers on the castle grounds. They believed it was an omen, a warning of invasion. Since then, sightings of the drummer have been rare, but when he does appear, people say it is always before a moment of crisis for the fortress. Imagine the sound of steady drumming echoing across the stone walls at night, a rhythm that no human hand is striking. For some, it is a call from history. For others, it is a reminder that the castle remembers its bloodiest hours. Visitors often speak of sudden drops in temperature when wandering through certain rooms and hallways. Some feel a hand brush against the shoulder, though no one is there. Others hear cries, whispers, or footsteps following them through the shadows. Guides tell of guests who faint, overcome by a rush of unseen energy as though the weight of centuries presses down on them in an instant. The castle's dungeons may be the most unsettling place of all. Prisoners of war from France, America, and other nations were held here in dark, airless cells. Many never saw the light of day again. Some died of sickness, others of starvation, and a few were executed. Their spirits are said to linger, trapped in the damp stones and echoing corridors. People who descend into the depths often describe feeling hands tugging at their clothes or an icy breath at the back of their neck. Skeptics might dismiss it as imagination, but the sheer number of accounts suggests something more. As you drift deeper into the story, picture the ancient walls of Edinburgh Castle glowing under the moonlight. The torches flicker, the air grows cold, and every shadow seems alive. You are walking where kings once ruled, where soldiers once fought, and where prisoners once cried out in despair. The castle is more than a monument. It is a vessel of memory, holding not only history, but also the voices of those who cannot leave. Standing at the gates of Edinburgh Castle, it is hard not to feel its immense weight pressing down from the centuries. The cobblestones beneath your feet have carried countless footsteps, each one layered with fear, duty, or hope. Soldiers have marched across them, monarchs have ridden in triumph, and prisoners have shuffled toward their fates. Every stone seems to breathe, carrying memories of joy and suffering alike. For many visitors, this is when the first shiver runs down the spine, as though unseen eyes are watching, quietly following from the ramparts above. The haunting of Edinburgh Castle is not just folklore. Over the years, researchers and paranormal investigators have reported consistent patterns. Some visitors experience cold spots so sharp that their breath frosts in the air, even on warm summer nights. Others describe sudden flashes of figures, only to find themselves standing alone moments later. There is a heavy silence in certain chambers, a silence so deep that the faintest sound, a drip of water, a scrape of a shoe, feels amplified into eternity. Among the most unsettling areas is the castle's prison vaults. These underground chambers once confined men from across the world, French captives from the Napoleonic Wars, pirates dragged from the North Sea, and even Americans captured during the War of Independence. Imagine their lives in these dark, airless rooms, weeks of damp stone, rotting straw, the stink of sickness, and the endless echo of chains. Many perished here without ceremony, their stories erased, except for the whispers they may still leave behind. Modern visitors walking through these vaults have reported being pushed, scratched, or surrounded by sudden gusts of icy wind that vanish as quickly as they appear. One story often told is of a prisoner who attempted to escape by hiding in a dung cart. Hoping to be wheeled out of the castle unnoticed, he climbed in and waited. But fate turned cruel. The cart was tipped over the walls and he fell to his death on the rocks below. Some claim his anguished cries still linger on stormy nights, carried on the wind through the streets below the castle. It is a grim reminder that Edinburgh's fortress was never a place of mercy, and that desperate souls often met desperate ends within its walls. Not all the apparitions are tied to war or punishment. Some speak of a spectral dog wandering near the old dog cemetery within the castle grounds. Soldiers in earlier centuries often kept loyal pets, and when those companions died, they were given tiny graves here, marked with stones. The soft padding of paws and faint whines in the stillness of night are said to come from these loyal spirits, guarding their masters even in death. Though less frightening than a headless drummer or a vanishing piper, this haunting carries a gentle sorrow, a reminder of bonds that even the grave could not break. The headless drummer, however, remains one of the most chilling legends tied to Edinburgh Castle. Witnesses across generations have described the same figure. A young boy with no head, clutching a drum, striking a soundless beat that can sometimes be heard before he is seen. His presence has always been tied to warnings, omens of danger to come. Soldiers who saw him centuries ago believed he foreshadowed invasions or sieges. Today, those who glimpse his shadow believe he is a guardian of sorts, doomed to march without rest, his warning drumbeat echoing through eternity. Few places in the castle feel as heavy with dread as the areas where the drummer has been sighted, as though the very air itself holds its breath when he appears. What makes the hauntings of Edinburgh Castle so striking is how many different spirits are said to dwell there, from the sorrowful cries of prisoners to the music of the piper and the drumming of the boy. The echoes come from every chapter of the fortress's history. Each ghost feels tied to a moment of deep emotion: fear, loyalty, suffering, or loss. For those who believe, these spirits are not just figments of imagination. They are fragments of human experience, still circling the stone walls that held their final moments. As you wander deeper into this story, picture yourself inside the castle's great hall. The fire crackles faintly. Shadows flicker across the stone walls, and every carved beam overhead seems to hold secret. You look around and see no one, yet the feeling of company lingers, heavy and constant. Perhaps it is only memory. Perhaps it is something more. In Edinburgh Castle, the line between the two feels impossibly thin. If you step outside onto the battlements at night, the city of Edinburgh stretches below, lights scattered across the hills like a constellation. Yet even with the modern world buzzing quietly in the distance, the castle itself feels untouched by time. The wind cuts sharper up here, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and stone. Those who linger too long often speak of a presence beside them, as if someone long gone has joined them to look out over the same view. Some leave quickly, unsettled by the invisible company. Others stay, wondering if they are sharing a moment with the countless souls who once stood guard on these very walls. One of the castle's most chilling spots is the so-called haunted vaults. These underground rooms lie beneath layers of history, carved into the volcanic rock. Centuries ago, they were used for storage, then for prisoners, and finally abandoned to dust and darkness. Yet stories persist that they were never truly empty. Visitors walking through these vaults often report strange sensations: the feeling of hands brushing against their arms, the prickling of hair on the back of the neck, and even the sound of children crying. Some investigators have captured faint voices on recording devices, whispers too soft to be explained by echoes or trickery. The vaults are so heavy with energy that even skeptics leave unsettled, unable to dismiss the weight pressing down on them. It is not just visitors who tell these stories. Guides who work at the castle day after day have their own experiences. One guide spoke of hearing a man breathing just behind her during a late tour. She turned quickly, expecting to find a straggler, but the passage was empty. Another described hearing footsteps pacing above her, only to remember there was no floor above where she stood. Many staff have grown used to these encounters, speaking of them almost casually, as though the spirits have become colleagues who never quite leave. Among the tales that echo most strongly is the phantom drummer's connection to the castle's darker times. His appearances, though rare, are always spoken of with reverence. One soldier described the faint tapping of a drum in the stillness of dawn, a sound that grew louder though no one was there. Moments later, a storm swept in from the north, cutting supplies and shaking the morale of the garrison. The men whispered that the drummer had warned them. Whether true or not, the legend has endured, giving the castle a sense of living history where the past still reaches forward to touch the present. The Lost Piper, too, has left his mark on Edinburgh. Even today, some residents of the Royal Mile, the historic street stretching down from the castle, say they hear faint notes of bagpipes drifting through the night. The sound comes suddenly, sharp and lonely, and then fades away. No player is ever found. To some, it is the city itself remembering the boy who vanished beneath its foundations. To others, it is the boy still searching for a way out, his tune echoing endlessly through tunnels that may no longer exist. The story has grown into local legend, told in hushed voices to children and visitors alike, but always with a sense of sorrow. The boy's courage, his willingness to descend into the dark with only his pipes, has given him a place in the city's heart. Perhaps that is why his ghost refuses to leave. Edinburgh Castle is also a place where history and haunting blur into one another. Every siege, every execution, Every royal intrigue has left its scars. The castle was once home to monarchs like Mary, Queen of Scots, whose presence lingers heavily in Scottish memory. It was also the site of betrayals and bloodshed, where power shifted hands through violence more often than peace. Some say it is not surprising that the fortress is restless. How could a place so soaked in conflict not echo with the cries of the past? Visitors who explore the castle at night often speak of an oppressive silence that seems to weigh on them. It is not the silence of peace, but the silence of waiting, as if the stones themselves are holding their breath. Some describe it as stepping into another time, where unseen figures watch from the corners, and the past feels only a heartbeat away. The air grows colder. Footsteps echo louder, and every door creak seems to carry a secret. Then there is the dog cemetery, small and unassuming, yet tenderly remembered. Here lie the faithful companions of soldiers, dogs who marched into battle, guarded camps, and brought comfort in times of fear. Their spirits, too, are said to linger. A visitor once described hearing the sound of nails clicking across stone, though no living animal was nearby. Another spoke of a dog's sigh, soft and weary, drifting through the stillness. These are not terrifying encounters, but gentle reminders of devotion that outlived death. In a fortress filled with stories of pain, the dogs bring a softer kind of haunting, one that speaks of love rather than loss. What makes Edinburgh Castle so unique among haunted places is its balance of grandeur and sorrow. It is a symbol of Scottish pride, a monument of resilience. Yet beneath the surface, in the tunnels and chambers, it is also a resting place for the restless. The combination makes it a place where the veil feels thin, where standing on ancient stone can bring you closer to those who stood there before. Imagine yourself now, lantern in hand, walking through a narrow passage deep within the castle. The walls are close on either side, damp with centuries of moisture. The air feels heavier the deeper you go. Somewhere ahead you hear the faintest echo, perhaps the tap of a drum, perhaps the note of a pipe. You pause, listening. The sound fades, replaced only by the pounding of your heart. You move forward, knowing that here in Edinburgh Castle, you are never truly alone. Edinburgh Castle does not only haunt the imagination of visitors, it also lingers in the collective memory of the city. For locals, the fortress is not just a tourist attraction, but a living presence. It has seen Edinburgh grow from a medieval town into a modern capital, yet the castle remains anchored in its own time. Walk through the city at dusk, and you may feel it looming above, the stone walls dark against the fading sky. The way it catches the last light of the day can make it appear alive, like a sentinel watching over the people below. And perhaps it is more than just stone that keeps watch. There have been countless reports of people seeing shadowy figures on the battlements. Guards who once stood their posts centuries ago seem to return, still pacing the walls. Sometimes the figures vanish when approached, other times they linger, silent and unmoving, as if trapped in their eternal duty. Tourists who have seen these shadows describe them with awe and unease, unsure if they have glimpsed a trick of light or the remnants of long-dead soldiers who cannot rest. The most unsettling part is that the shadows often appear in groups, suggesting entire patrols still walk their rounds long after the world has moved on. The castle's great hall has its own echoes. Once filled with banquets, speeches, and political plots, it is now a place where silence reigns. Yet silence is not emptiness. Visitors have felt themselves surrounded by an invisible crowd, the hum of conversation just beyond hearing, the flicker of unseen movements in the corner of their eyes. One traveler spoke of the sensation of walking through a dense fog of voices, though the hall was empty. Another felt a hand pressed lightly against their back. guiding them forward before releasing. These moments are fleeting, but they leave a lasting impression. The castle does not let you forget that it remembers. In one of the deepest chambers where light barely reaches, the atmosphere is so heavy that people often describe it as unbearable. A sense of despair clings to the walls. This was once a place of confinement and execution, and the suffering has etched itself into the very stones. Paranormal groups who have investigated here claim to hear chains rattling and screams faintly rising from the dark. Some skeptics laugh at these claims, but those who step into the chamber often leave pale and shaken, refusing to return. It is as if the anguish of centuries cannot be silenced, echoing endlessly through time. Among the many stories, one of the most persistent is the tale of the headless drummer. His soundless beat has been reported by soldiers, visitors, and guards alike. The thought of a child spirit robbed even of his face, endlessly striking an unseen drum, is one that clings to the imagination. Why does he appear only before danger? Is he a warning, or is he reliving his own moment of terror, forever locked into the rhythm of fear? No one knows. But when the sound of drums carries across the stone walls at night, those who hear it rarely forget. The Phantom Piper is equally unforgettable. His legend is tied not only to the castle, but to the city itself. The tunnels beneath the fortress have long been shrouded in mystery, said to stretch under the streets of Edinburgh, reaching as far as the Royal Mile. When the boy vanished within them, he became part of the city's very soul. Some say his spirit is restless because his body was never found, trapped in a labyrinth with no escape. Others believe he continues to play so that he will not be forgotten. His music, faint and haunting, serves as a reminder that the castle is more than stone. It is a place where the living and the dead still share the same space. Even animals are said to walk the grounds long after death. The loyal dogs of the soldiers, buried with care in their small cemetery, are not gone. Their spirits seem to linger, loyal to the end. Perhaps they keep watch over their masters, waiting for a reunion that may never come. Their presence, though soft and quiet, adds another layer to the haunting tapestry of the castle, proof that not all spirits are born from violence. Some are born from love. What makes Edinburgh Castle unforgettable is how its hauntings weave together into a single living story. The fortress is not ruled by one ghost or one legend, but by many, each tied to a different part of its history. The piper, the drummer, the prisoners, the soldiers, and even the dogs, all are part of the same great chorus of voices. Their stories overlap, creating a haunting that feels complete and inescapable. Step into the castle, and you step into centuries of echoes. As night deepens and the moon rises higher above the fortress, the stones seem to glow pale against the dark sky. The air grows colder, the silence heavier. You might close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on Castle Rock centuries ago, surrounded by warriors, queens, and prisoners. And when you open your eyes again, you may wonder if they are still there, watching from the shadows, waiting for someone to notice them. For those who visit Edinburgh Castle, it is not just a glimpse into history. It is a chance to walk alongside those who refuse to fade, to feel the presence of lives that ended long ago but never truly left. It is a place where the boundary between past and present blurs until you cannot tell one from the other. And in that blur, perhaps, lies the true haunting of Edinburgh Castle. Beneath the grandeur of Edinburgh Castle, away from the battlements and the sunlight on stone, lies a world of shadows. The vaults beneath the fortress have long carried a reputation of their own. They are places carved out of the volcanic rock, cold and damp, where light struggles to reach. To step into these vaults is to step into the silence of centuries, where whispers of the past cling tightly to the walls. If the castle above feels alive with echoes, then these chambers are its beating heart, hidden, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Many who visit describe the air as immediately different. The moment the door closes behind them, the atmosphere shifts. Breathing feels harder, as though the air is thicker, charged with something unseen. The walls glisten faintly with moisture, and the scent of stone and earth is overpowering. Some feel a rush of anxiety without knowing why, a sudden sense that they are being observed. It is in these depths that some of the most chilling stories of the castle emerge, stories that continue to haunt those who hear them. The vaults were not always intended for imprisonment. At different times, they were used for storage, for shelter, even as makeshift workshops. But during the wars that scarred Scotland and beyond, the vaults became holding cells for prisoners of war. Men from France, Ireland, Spain, and America were dragged here, locked away in the pitch-dark chambers, given only the barest scraps of food and water. For many, this place was their last sight of the world. Disease, hunger, and despair claimed countless lives, and the cries of the forgotten still seemed to echo faintly through the silence. Accounts from visitors speak of disembodied voices that rise suddenly in the quiet, whispers in languages long gone, groans of pain or sharp cries that pierce the stillness before fading into nothing. Paranormal investigators have brought recording devices down into the vaults, and many claim to have captured faint voices, pleading, murmuring, calling out for help. The most unnerving part is that these sounds are often heard when no one else is nearby. Guides recount stories of guests who refuse to stay, overcome by fear after hearing footsteps pacing just behind them, though the corridors were empty. The vaults are also known for sudden cold spots. You may walk through one chamber with the air stale and heavy, only to cross an invisible threshold where the temperature drops sharply. Some describe it as stepping into a freezer, their skin prickling as though icy hands had brushed across it. Others feel dizzy, drained of strength, as if the very stones are pulling the energy from their bodies. Skeptics might explain it away as drafts of air or the effects of the underground, but the experiences are too consistent, repeated by too many visitors across too many years to be easily dismissed. One tale that stands out is of a man who visited the vaults during a public tour. As he stood listening to the guide's stories, he suddenly shouted that someone had grabbed his arm. He swore he could feel long fingers digging into his skin, though no one stood near him. When he rolled up his sleeve, a fresh red mark was visible, as though from a hand. The tour group fell silent, unsettled, and the man refused to descend any deeper. Experiences like these are not isolated. Time and again, people describe the feeling of being touched by something unseen, something unwilling to let them pass unnoticed. Even those who expect nothing often leave the vaults shaken. One visitor recalled laughing off the idea of ghosts, determined to prove the tales were just stories. Yet when he walked into the darkest chamber, he froze. He could see nothing, yet he felt a wave of grief so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. It was as though the sorrow of those who had died there still lingered, pressing against his heart. He left quickly, no longer laughing, unwilling to return to the silence that seemed so full of pain. Moving deeper beneath the castle, the vaults take on an atmosphere unlike any other. These underground chambers were carved into the volcanic rock that once formed the foundation of Edinburgh itself. What began as practical storage rooms for weapons and supplies soon turned into something far darker as time and necessity twisted their purpose. The deeper you go, the more you feel the weight of centuries pressing down. A silence so complete it almost has a sound of its own. In the early days, The vault served as spaces for craftsmen and merchants who lived within the shadow of the mighty fortress. But with damp walls, poor ventilation, and the ever-present chill, many who worked here spoke of sickness and a heaviness in the chest, as if the air itself fought against them. Over time, people began to whisper that these vaults were not empty, that shadows moved when no torchlight flickered, and voices murmured in corners where no one stood. When the city above grew overcrowded and poor families were forced into whatever shelter they could find, some of the vaults became makeshift homes. Imagine living with your children in these damp stone chambers, water dripping steadily from the ceiling, the cold seeping into your bones, families huddled together on bare ground, listening to rats scurry across the walls and ceilings. The vaults were said to be filled with the cries of infants, the coughing of the sick, and the desperate prayers of those who had nowhere else to turn. It is no surprise that so much human misery left a mark, creating a lingering sense of sorrow that seems to echo even now. As years passed, crime began to flourish in these hidden spaces. The vaults became a haven for smugglers, thieves, and others who thrived in the shadows. Here deals were struck, goods were hidden, and secrets exchanged in the pitch-black corners. Tales spread of confrontations that ended in violence, of lives snuffed out quickly and without mercy. When footsteps echo through the halls today, some believe they are not only the traces of tourists and guides, but the restless pacing of those who once lived and died here under desperate or criminal circumstances. Many visitors speak of a sudden drop in temperature, as though stepping into a pocket of icy air. It is not uncommon to hear reports of sudden pressure on the chest, as if unseen hands are trying to squeeze the breath from their lungs. Some feel tugging at their clothes or hair, while others report a sharp whisper in their ear, too close and too clear to dismiss as imagination. These sensations happen most often in the lower vaults, where darkness seems to cling more tightly to the walls. One particularly chilling story is told of a young boy who appears to visitors from time to time. He is said to be around 6 years old, dressed in ragged clothing that looks centuries out of place. Witnesses describe him as pale, with wide eyes that glisten with both sadness and curiosity. The boy does not speak, but many say he will reach out a hand as if asking for help. Some visitors have felt the touch of his cold fingers before he fades away into the shadows. Guides speculate he may have been one of the many children who perished here from sickness or neglect when families were forced to live in the vaults. Another figure that is often mentioned is that of a tall man who lurks in the farthest chambers. His presence is said to be oppressive, his shadow stretching unnaturally long even when the lighting is dim. Those who have encountered him describe an overwhelming feeling of dread, as though standing in the presence of something malevolent. Some believe he was once a criminal who met a violent end in these vaults, while others suggest he could be something far older, a spirit bound to the castle long before humans repurposed the chambers. When ghost tours began guiding people through the vaults in more recent years, many participants reported unexpected experiences. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain within minutes, and strange orbs of light appear in photographs. Visitors often leave shaken, claiming they saw shadowy figures move across the walls or heard footsteps pacing behind them, even when no one else was near. It is this strange mixture of history and haunting that gives the vaults their power. They are not merely empty rooms beneath a castle, but spaces heavy with the weight of suffering, survival, and secrets. Every corner holds a memory, and every chill in the air feels like a hand reaching out from centuries past. Among the most unsettling aspects of the vaults is how sound behaves within them. In the upper chambers, footsteps echo faintly, carrying like ripples through still water. But the deeper one descends, the more unnatural the silence becomes. Guides often note that voices seem to vanish into the stone, muffled as though swallowed by the earth itself. In these moments, visitors feel as if they are cut off from the world above, suspended in a place where time holds no meaning. Some have claimed to hear faint laughter, the cry of a child, or even the sound of a bustling marketplace, as though the vaults still remember fragments of lives once lived within them. There is one section of the vaults in particular, known among paranormal investigators as the most active. The room itself is small, damp, and unremarkable in design, but those who enter often describe an intense unease. People report feeling watched from all angles at once, their skin prickling as though dozens of unseen eyes linger in the darkness. A number of guests on ghost tours have fainted in this very chamber, while others felt overwhelmed with sudden nausea. Paranormal researchers suggest that the combination of human suffering, crime, and secrecy concentrated in these vaults may have created an environment ripe for hauntings, a kind of spiritual residue that refuses to fade. Some accounts point to strange physical phenomena. Tourists have claimed to see a flicker of candlelight dancing in the distance, only to find the hallway ahead completely empty. Others describe the sensation of walking through the patches of freezing cold air, so sharp and sudden that it feels like stepping through a veil. On more than one occasion, people have emerged from the vaults with scratches or bruises they cannot explain. The marks appear fresh, as though inflicted moments earlier, yet no one can ever identify a cause. One chilling tale comes from a guide who, late one evening, stayed behind after a tour to tidy up. Alone in the vaults, he heard the faint sound of shuffling feet behind him. Thinking he had left a guest behind, he turned back to check, only to see the corridor completely empty. As he stood listening, the sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed only a few steps away. Yet no figure emerged from the darkness. The guide later admitted he fled in fear, convinced that whatever followed him was not of this world. The boy who appears in the vaults is not the only child spirit said to wander these halls. Visitors have reported hearing soft crying, often in the deepest chambers, accompanied by the sensation of small hands tugging at their clothing. Some speculate that these could be echoes of orphans who once sought refuge in the vaults when the city above offered them no safety. In the stillness of night, their sorrow feels tangible, as if time has trapped them in endless longing. Perhaps the most terrifying entity described is the presence of a shadowy figure that lingers in the lower vaults. Those who encounter it speak of a tall, dark silhouette that moves silently from corner to corner. Its form is never fully clear, but the sense of dread it brings is unmistakable. Many insist it is not the spirit of any one person, but something older and far more sinister. Some believe it feeds on fear, drawing strength from the terror of those who enter its domain. A few investigators even claim that the atmosphere of the vaults shifts when this presence makes itself known, the air thickening, as though weighed down by invisible chains. Despite the fear, there is an undeniable fascination with the vaults. People continue to visit, hoping to brush against the unknown, to feel the electric thrill of standing in a place where the veil between worlds feels impossibly thin. For some, the vaults are proof that history is never truly silent, that the stones themselves hold the memories of all who came before. For others, they are a reminder that darkness clings to places steeped in suffering, leaving behind more than just stories. Guides often conclude their tours by reminding guests that while the vaults may be filled with the tales of sorrow and fear, they are also part of Edinburgh's living history. Every visitor adds another layer to the story, whether by sharing their own chilling experience or simply carrying the memory of the vaults with them into the night. Yet many leave with the lingering question, were the touches, the whispers, the shadows just tricks of the mind? Or did they truly walk among restless spirits, still tethered to this underground world? Among the most compelling stories tied to the vaults are those told by professional investigators who have spent long nights recording and observing in the chambers. Some have left with evidence they cannot explain. Sudden spikes on electromagnetic meters, faint voices caught on tape, orbs of light captured darting across photographs in rooms where no dust or insects were present. Others recall the sheer emotional weight of the place, the way their moods shifted from curiosity to unease to outright dread as they moved deeper into the maze of stone. These vaults, more than any other part of the castle, seem to amplify what each person carries within. For the skeptical, the silence presses until nerves fray. For the believer, it feels like stepping into a place where the other side waits just a breath away. Even outside official investigations, ordinary visitors continue to share chilling experiences. One woman described standing in the vaults when she felt a sharp tug on her hair, so sudden she staggered forward. Another recounted hearing the steady rhythm of boots marching in the chamber beside her, though her group was entirely still. Couples have reported feeling hands slip into theirs, only to turn and find their partner standing at a distance. These moments happen without warning, fleeting and unprovable, yet they leave an impression that lingers long after leaving. The vaults are also tied to an unusual history beyond their role as prisons. In the late 18th century, as Edinburgh expanded, parts of the vaults were used by tradesmen and merchants who set up workshops in the underground chambers. It seemed practical: stone walls, shelter from the weather, and a place close to the bustle of the city above. But soon the conditions became unbearable. The damp seeped into everything. Fires for warmth smoked and choked the chambers, and flooding was constant. Those who worked there spoke of an oppressive feeling, as though they were never alone. By the early 19th century, many had abandoned the vaults, convinced they were cursed. When the vaults were rediscovered later, the stories only grew darker. Excavations revealed discarded belongings, rusted tools, and even human remains. It was said that the destitute of Edinburgh, the poorest of the poor, had taken shelter here when no other refuge could be found. Their lives ended in silence, buried under centuries of stone, leaving behind nothing but fragments of pottery, scraps of clothing, and the echo of despair. Some believe it is their restless energy that fills the chambers, their quiet suffering forever woven to the air. There is also the infamous story of a certain Mr. Boots, a spirit said to stomp through the vaults with angry steps. Guides tell of hearing heavy booted footsteps pacing back and forth, accompanied by an overwhelming feeling of hostility. He is thought to be a violent man from centuries past, someone who brought cruelty into the underground chambers, and whose presence lingers in the form of an aggressive shadow. Visitors unlucky enough to cross paths with him describe a suffocating heaviness, as though the very air is pressing against their chest. Some have run from the vaults in tears after feeling him approach, unable to bear the sensation of being trapped with something so malevolent. And yet, not all presences are described as cruel. A handful of visitors report encountering warmth, fleeting but unmistakable, like the sensation of a kind hand on the shoulder or the hush of a lullaby echoing faintly in the dark. Perhaps not every spirit is lost in anger. Perhaps some remain as quiet guardians of memory, reminding us that history holds more than just pain. These gentler stories are rare, but they give the vaults a complexity, suggesting that even in the most haunted of places, not all is shadow. As the centuries pass, Edinburgh Castle continues to welcome thousands through its gates each year, and the vaults remain one of its greatest mysteries. Guides still tell the tales, investigators still seek answers, and visitors still walk away with their own encounters etched into memory. Some may dismiss what they felt as tricks of the mind or the imagination feeding on darkness. Others leave convinced they touch something beyond understanding, something older than the castle itself. Standing in the vaults, surrounded by stone carved from the ancient rock beneath the fortress, it is difficult not to wonder how much of the past lingers in silence, waiting to be felt rather than seen. Do the whispers belong to spirits trapped between worlds, or are they echoes of memory, replaying like distant music that never truly fades? For those who descend into the vaults, the line between the living and the dead feels thinner, fragile, and uncertain. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, it is impossible to leave without sensing that you have stood in a place where history is not finished speaking. The vaults of Edinburgh Castle are more than stone chambers. They are repositories of memory, soaked in sorrow and fear, yet still alive with presence. To walk their corridors is to brush against centuries of life and death, to step into a space where time bends and shadows breathe. They remind us that the earth remembers, that suffering leaves an imprint, and that perhaps the past is not as distant as we like to think. When you emerge once more into the light of day, the air fresh against your skin, the silence of the vaults clings to you, subtle and unshakable, like a whisper carried from the depths. High in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, perched on a rocky hill where forests stretch endlessly into mist, stands Bran Castle. Its towers and battlements rise sharply against the sky, their pointed shapes casting eerie silhouettes when the moon drifts overhead. To gaze upon Bran Castle is to feel a mixture of awe and unease. Its walls, weathered by centuries, seem to hold secrets older than the stories written about them. And though it has stood as fortress, royal residence, and museum, most know it by another name. It is the castle forever tied to the legend of Count Dracula. The association comes not from history alone, but from myth, literature, and imagination woven together. Bram Stoker, the Irish author of the 1897 novel Dracula, never set foot in Bran Castle, yet his descriptions of the Count's dark lair seem to echo the fortress's appearance. The steep cliffs, the looming towers, the isolation among shadowy forests, all of it fits the picture of a vampire's domain. Over time, the two became inseparable, and Bran Castle transformed in the minds of many from fortress of stone to lair of the undead. But beyond the legend of Stoker's vampire lies a darker historical figure, Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler. This 15th century ruler of Wallachia was both feared and revered, remembered for his brutal methods of punishment and his ruthless defense of his land against the encroaching Ottoman Empire. Stories of Vlad's cruelty, impaling enemies on wooden stakes and leaving their bodies as a warning, spread far and wide. Over the centuries, his reputation merged with folklore about blood-drinking demons of Eastern Europe, and thus he became forever linked to Dracula. Whether Vlad ever set foot in Bran Castle remains uncertain. Some historians argue he may have passed through its halls, perhaps even been imprisoned there for a short time. Others believe the connection is tenuous, born more of rumor than fact. Yet the image endures. To stand in Bran Castle today is to feel as though the walls themselves hold echoes of Vlad's shadow, blending history and horror into something more powerful than either alone. Visitors who approach the castle often describe the approach as otherworldly. The forest grows thicker as the path climbs, and mist clings stubbornly to the trees. The closer one comes, the more the castle seems to loom, as if rising from the mountain itself. At night, when the torches along the walls flicker, the fortress glows faintly against the darkness, a solitary beacon of both protection and menace. It is easy to imagine the Count watching from one of the windows, waiting silently as travelers pass below. Inside, the castle is a labyrinth of narrow staircases, winding corridors, and dimly lit rooms. Stone walls absorb the cold, and every sound seems magnified, from the creak of a floorboard to the rustle of fabric. Some rooms display medieval weapons and armor, remnants of centuries when bloodshed and defense were part of everyday life. Others are furnished with ornate chairs and faded tapestries, reminders of the nobility who once lived here. But the atmosphere never feels entirely domestic. Even in the daylight, Bran Castle carries a chill, as if shadows linger in its corners longer than they should. For many, the most unsettling part of Bran Castle is its secret passageway. Hidden doors and staircases carved within the walls create a sense of mystery, as though the castle itself was designed to conceal truths. Guides speak of narrow shafts where guards once moved unseen, and hidden stairs that lead from one chamber to another. These secret paths inspire countless stories of intrigue, betrayal, and haunting. Some visitors report feeling watched as they climb these hidden steps, their hands brushing against cold stone polished by centuries of touch. The legends of Dracula intertwine seamlessly with these spaces. The thought of a vampire moving silently through hidden passages, slipping from room to room without a sound, feels almost natural here. And in truth, Romanian folklore long before Stoker spoke of creatures called strigoi, restless spirits who rose from their graves to torment the living, often feeding on their blood. Bran Castle, with its Gothic silhouette and secretive design, became the perfect stage for these old fears to live on. Yet Bran Castle is not only home to legends of vampires. Visitors and locals alike tell of strange experiences within its halls, cold spots that appear suddenly, the scent of burning candles when none are lit, and faint whispers carried through empty rooms. Some claim to see fleeting figures dressed in medieval garments, moving through corridors before fading into nothing. Others describe a heavy sensation pressing on their chest, as if the castle itself resists their presence. Some visitors speak of hearing footsteps in the upper halls when no one is present. The rhythm is deliberate, slow, and heavy, echoing across the wooden floors as though a guard still patrols centuries after his duty should have ended. On occasion, doors creak open on their own, swinging gently despite the absence of any draft. Guides sometimes assure their guests that it is only the old building settling, but the timing feels uncanny, as if the castle itself chooses to remind them that they are not alone. One of the castle's most infamous rooms is known simply as the torture chamber. Here, instruments once used in the punishment of prisoners remain on display. Iron devices, shackles, and spiked wheels tell a story of pain etched deep into the walls. The energy of this chamber is said to be overwhelming. Many visitors describe a sudden tightness in their chest or a wave of dizziness, as though the suffering that once filled the space still radiates outward. A few have reported hearing faint groans or catching the metallic scent of blood, though the room is long cleaned and silent. To stand in this chamber is to sense the cruelty of a time when human lives were often weighed against power and fear. But the castle's atmosphere is not confined to rooms of violence. In certain chambers, guests have spoken of fleeting glimpses of women in long gowns, their figures pale and translucent, drifting through stone corridors with expressions too sorrowful to be mistaken for joy. Some say these are the shades of noble women who once lived here, caught in endless loops of memory. Others believe they are visitors from another age, lost in the folds of time, their presence pressing against our world only for a moment before vanishing. The castle's courtyard also holds its share of eerie tales. When the moonlight pours across the stone walls, the shadows stretch long and strange. Travelers have described seeing shapes move across the courtyard when it was otherwise empty, as though spectral figures gather silently under the cover of night. Sometimes it is a soldier, sometimes a woman, sometimes a group that flickers like smoke before fading into the mist. The silence that follows such sightings often leaves witnesses shaken, unable to explain what they have just seen. Perhaps the strongest connection to the supernatural, though, comes not from what is seen, but from what is felt. Bran Castle exudes a strange pull, a blend of fear and fascination that has drawn countless seekers of the unknown. The narrow staircases seem to guide footsteps deeper into shadow, while the pointed towers remind visitors that the castle was built as much to intimidate as to protect. Standing in the central hall, surrounded by stone, one cannot help but feel the presence of centuries pressing close. History here does not sit quietly. It demands to be acknowledged. Folklore only amplifies the atmosphere. The region around Bran Castle is filled with tales of spirits and restless beings. In rural villages, stories of Strigoi and Moroi, spirits that rise from their graves to torment the living, were passed down through generations. Some are said to take the shape of animals, others to appear as pale figures in the night. To locals, these stories were not fiction, but warnings, reminders to respect the boundary between the living and the dead. When such tales are carried into the looming figure of Bran Castle, they take on new life, blurring the line between myth and experience. Even those who come seeking only history often find themselves unsettled. A simple tour can turn into an inexplicable encounter, a sudden whisper in an empty room, a shadow flickering at the edge of sight, or the strange sensation of being followed along the staircases. Some leave shaken but intrigued, eager to share their stories. Others leave with an unspoken relief, happy to step back into the open air after lingering too long in the castle's embrace. It is this mixture of beauty and dread that has given Bran Castle its power, its Gothic silhouette, its legends of blood and fear, and its echoes of real history, all combine into something greater than any single tale. To walk through its halls is to step into a place where centuries overlap, where myth intertwines with truth, and where the imagination is free to conjure horrors in the silence. One of the most chilling reports from Bran Castle involves the figure of a tall man seen in the corridors, often described as cloaked in dark garments. Witnesses say he moves silently, his presence accompanied by a sudden heaviness in the air. Sometimes he is glimpsed only from the corner of the eye, disappearing as soon as attention shifts toward him. At other times, he lingers long enough to send shivers through those who meet his gaze. Many connect this apparition to the legend of Vlad the Impaler, convinced that his restless spirit still haunts the castle, walking its halls in eternal watch. But the stories do not end with one figure. Several guests have spoken of ghostly women roaming the chambers, often appearing in upper rooms where the nobility once slept. They drift silently, and their forms faint, their gowns flowing as though stirred by an invisible wind. Some are seen weeping, their faces streaked with sorrow that lingers across centuries. Others appear stern, even angry, their presence so commanding that witnesses instinctively step aside, as though still acknowledging their status in death. Folklore suggests they may be noble women, wronged by betrayal, or wives of rulers whose lives ended tragically within these very walls. Children, too, are said to haunt the castle. Visitors have heard the faint sound of laughter echoing through the stone corridors, sometimes accompanied by the pitter-patter of running feet. Yet when searched, no child is found. One story tells of a woman who toured the castle and paused in the courtyard only to hear a soft giggle just behind her shoulder. Turning quickly, she saw no one, though she swore she felt a small hand brush against her own. The idea of children's spirits lingering in such a fortress adds a different layer of unease, innocence, entwined with darkness, as though even the young were caught in the shadows of Bran. The castle's secret passages add to these encounters. In particular, a hidden staircase that connects the first and third floors has become a focus for paranormal reports. Visitors climbing it sometimes feel a cold draft, though the passage is sealed tight. Others sense someone following closely behind them, only to turn and find the staircase empty. One guide recalls a guest who screamed as she felt two icy hands press against her back, as though urging her up the steps. Shaken, she refused to continue, certain that something unseen had made contact. Bran Castle also carries a history of conflict that seems to bleed into its hauntings. Over the centuries, it stood as a strategic stronghold against invaders, and blood was shed both outside its walls and within. Some believe the restless soldiers still remain, bound by duty or unfinished battles. Tourists have described hearing clanking armor in the dead of night, or the heavy thud of boots pacing in rhythm, as if an invisible guard still patrols the fortress. At times, these sounds come in waves, marching that begins softly and grows louder before fading again into silence. Such echoes defy simple explanation, leaving many convinced that the ghosts of warriors refuse to abandon their posts. The connection to Vlad the Impaler also fuels stories of far darker presences. Local folklore speaks of Vlad's cruelty with a weight that goes beyond history. His punishments, his thirst for control, and the sheer terror he inspired have made him larger than life, and in turn, the belief is that such energy could not simply fade with death. Some claim that the darker energies of Bran Castle are not spirits of the innocent, but shadows of cruelty itself, fragments of suffering so powerful they have taken on a life of their own. When visitors describe feelings of dread so sharp they cannot breathe, or see a figure that feels more monstrous than human, many believe they are encountering this legacy of cruelty alive in spirit form. Still, not every experience is one of horror. Some visitors report moments of strange calm, as though the castle occasionally offers comfort rather than fear. One traveler spoke of standing by a window overlooking the Carpathians when he felt a soft presence beside him, like someone watching the view in silence. Instead of terror, he felt peace, as though sharing a quiet moment with a long-forgotten soul. These gentler encounters remind us that haunted places are not only filled with darkness, they also carry the remnants of lives once fully lived, with love, longing, and quiet beauty woven into the stone. All these stories of nobles and guards, children and cloaked figures, create a tapestry of legend that makes Bran Castle one of the most enduringly haunted places in Europe. And while many arrive because of its association with Dracula, most leave with a deeper impression, realizing that the castle's true power lies not only in myth, but in the unexplainable weight of its history. It is not only a fortress or a tourist attraction. It is a living story, where the boundaries between fact and folklore dissolve into shadow. The peasants of Transylvania have long told stories of shapes drifting through the courtyard at night, figures that seem too tall, too thin, with faces hidden by shadows. Some describe them as wandering nobles cursed to walk without rest. Others whisper that they are the servants of Dracula himself, called forth to guard the castle even long after his death. When the wind rises, rattling the iron gates and shaking the shutters, villagers cross themselves, whispering prayers against the old forces that cling to the fortress. Inside, certain rooms are said to carry a weight unlike any other. One chamber, narrow and dim, has been called the Room of Murmurs, Visitors often pause in silence, claiming they hear voices in a language they cannot understand, low and steady as if reciting ancient words. Some have felt invisible hands brush against their shoulders or tug gently at their clothing, as though unseen guides are trying to lead them elsewhere. Tourists describe sudden chills that crawl up their necks, even when the air outside is warm, as though the stones themselves breathe with cold memory. The dungeon is perhaps the darkest of Bran's legends. Chains still hang from the walls, rusty but unmistakable. It is said that prisoners once languished here in total darkness, starved of both food and hope. Guides recount how, during quiet moments, faint cries echo in the silence, cries that seem to rise from beneath the earth. Some who dare to linger say they feel their chests tighten, as though sharing the agony of those who once suffered in the gloom. Above, the castle's tower has its own story. On stormy nights, lightning strikes near the peak, illuminating the battlements for a heartbeat before vanishing into the void. In that fleeting light, countless visitors have sworn to see a figure standing on the highest wall, cloaked and watching, with no trace left behind once the sky grows dark again. Could it be a trick of the eye, born of fear and suggestion? Or does the spirit of Vlad, or something even older, still stand guard over his fortress? The connection between Bran Castle and Vlad the Impaler is not as direct as stories suggest. Historians agree that he may have never lived here, though he likely passed through these lands. Still, the castle's imposing presence, combined with tales of his cruelty, gave birth to the legend that this was his lair. The myth took on a life of its own, weaving fact with imagination until the two became inseparable. What lingers is not only the memory of Vlad, but the weight of belief itself, which can carve stories as sharply as any blade. Local folklore blends Dracula with older Carpathian myths, where restless souls called strigoi rise from their graves to wander the night. These beings are said to drink the vitality of the living, slipping into homes unseen, feeding on fear as much as blood. Bran Castle, perched high among mist and forest, became the perfect vessel for these myths, a place where reality and legend melt together. To step inside is to step into that mingling of truth and tale, where shadows carry both history and imagination. Many visitors today come not for the history, but for the sensation. Paranormal investigators set up their equipment in the halls, listening for strange frequencies, watching for movements beyond the eye. Some leave with nothing, others with recordings of faint whispers or flickers of figures across their screens. Skeptics dismiss them as tricks of light or faulty devices, yet believers see proof that the castle lives on in ways beyond the material. The people who work within Bran Castle often keep their own experiences close, hesitant to share too much. A guard once spoke quietly of hearing footsteps on a staircase when he was alone on his shift. Another described the sight of a woman in white drifting across a courtyard before fading into the mist. Tourists have even left the grounds in a hurry, too shaken by what they felt to continue their visit. Bran Castle holds its secrets tightly. The walls are heavy with centuries of life, death, and story. Whether it is the ghost of Vlad, the restless spirits of prisoners, or the weight of myth made real by generations of belief, something stirs within its chambers. As night folds across the Transylvanian hills and the forests whisper in the wind, the castle seems to lean closer to those who listen, inviting them to hear what it has never truly silenced. Even now, under the bright lights of tourism, Bran Castle remains more than a relic. It is a dream given form, a nightmare kept alive by the minds that walk its halls. For those who close their eyes while lying in its shadow, the sound of a creaking floorboard or the brush of cold air against the skin is enough to remind them that perhaps legends are not only tales of the past, perhaps they are still alive, waiting just beyond the candle's glow. Welcome again to the quiet stillness of the night. The world outside may be calm, but the places we visit tonight are anything but. Our journey now takes us to Northumberland, in the rugged borderlands between England and Scotland. Here, wrapped in mists and the echoes of centuries, stands a fortress so steeped in blood and sorrow that many call it the most haunted castle in all of England. This is Chillingham Castle, a place where history and horror walk hand in hand, and where the whispers of the past still cling to every stone. From the outside, Chillingham has the appearance of strength. Its towers rise tall, its walls thick, built not only to impress, but to endure. For centuries, this fortress guarded the northern border, witnessing brutal conflicts between England and Scotland. Yet behind those walls, behind the high battlements and iron gates, lies a darkness that goes far beyond ordinary history. It is said that no other castle in Britain has collected such a legacy of death, cruelty, and lingering spirits. The first thing to understand about Chillingham is its purpose. This was never just a home or a symbol of wealth. It was a fortress, a place built for war. The cries of soldiers and the clash of steel once echoed here, and the blood of countless men stained its stones. Generations of battles left scars not only on the land but on the souls who lived and died within its walls. Those who visit today often describe a strange heaviness, a sense of dread, as though the castle itself remembers all it has seen. Yet it is not only war that gave Chillingham its reputation. What makes this place notorious are the dungeons and torture chambers hidden within. Stories tell of unimaginable cruelty inflicted on prisoners during the Middle Ages. It is said that screams once filled the lower halls day after day, echoing from the darkness. Those who dared to rebel against authority, those caught in the chaos of border wars, or simply those unfortunate enough to fall into the wrong hands, all may have met their fate in the castle's depths. One chamber in particular has become infamous. Deep below the castle lies what was once the torture room. Devices of pain and punishment were said to have been used here in ways too grim to fully imagine. Chains still cling to the walls and shadows gather in the corners. Guides whisper of prisoners who suffered for hours or even days before meeting their end. The horror of this place was not a momentary violence, but a prolonged ordeal, designed to break both body and spirit. It is little wonder that visitors often feel sudden waves of fear here, as though the suffering imprinted itself upon the stones. Among the many spirits said to linger in Chillingham, one of the most famous is known as the Blue Boy. His story is as tragic as it is chilling. Centuries ago, a young child was bricked alive within the walls of the castle. His cries for help, faint and desperate, went unheard until silence claimed him. For years, guests in the castle reported hearing the sound of a boy sobbing in the darkness. Some even claimed to see a small blue light flickering near the room where he died, followed by the vision of a child's figure glowing in blue before fading into nothing. When renovations were carried out, bones of a child were indeed found within the walls, a haunting confirmation of the legend. The Blue Boy is not alone in his eternal wandering. The ghost of Lady Mary Berkeley, a noblewoman betrayed by her husband, is also said to drift through the halls. Abandoned and heartbroken, she spent her final years pacing the castle, waiting for a man who never returned. Even now, footsteps are heard in the quiet hours of the night, steady and sorrowful, echoing through the corridors. Many believe it is Mary, still searching for the love she lost centuries ago. Visitors to Chillingham often report sensations they cannot explain. Sudden drops in temperature, whispers that rise from empty rooms, and the unnerving feeling of being watched are common. Some describe faint hands brushing against their arms, or a cold pressure resting on their shoulders. In the grand hall, where noble feasts once took place, guests have felt the weight of unseen eyes, as though the spirits of lords and ladies still sit at long tables, watching silently as strangers enter their domain. In the old chapel, another presence is often felt. The room is small, lined with stone, and bathed in the dim glow of candles when tours are held. It should be a place of peace, yet those who enter describe an oppressive atmosphere, heavy and stifling. Some say they hear faint chanting, others report the sudden sound of a sigh. On rare occasions, visitors have claimed to see a pale figure kneeling in prayer, vanishing when approached. Was it a monk still bound to his duty, or a tormented soul unable to find rest within sacred walls? The castle's courtyard holds its own whispers of the past. Once a space of activity and life, it is now eerily quiet after sunset. A chill lingers in the open air, and many say they have seen shadows flit across the stones, moving too quickly to be tricks of light. Horses are sometimes heard snorting and stamping as if restless, though none are present. On still nights, the sound of hooves striking the ground has been reported, echoing faintly against the walls. Perhaps they are echoes of battles fought long ago when cavalry thundered into the fray. But it is the dungeon, deep below the castle, that leaves the strongest mark on those who enter. Guides lower visitors into its depths, where the air grows colder and the light barely reaches. The stones are damp, the ceiling low. Here, countless prisoners faced their final days. The pit, a dark hole in the ground, was once used to dispose of bodies. Skeletons have been found at the bottom, their presence grim reminders of the fate that awaited so many. Visitors often feel uneasy standing above it, as though the silence itself is watching. In the same dungeon, faint cries have been reported. A low moan drifting through the shadows, or a whisper calling out though no one is there. Some claim they feel sudden pressure against their chest, a suffocating sensation that fades only once they leave. Paranormal investigators have recorded strange fluctuations in temperature and unexplained sounds of scratching against the walls. Many believe that the spirits of the tortured still linger, trapped by the pain they endured. Chillingham Castle is also known for the ghost of a man in armor, seen wandering the staircases and corridors. His footsteps are heavy, echoing long after he vanishes from sight. Witnesses describe a tall figure, face hidden beneath a helmet, carrying himself with the weary gait of a soldier. Some believe he is one of the countless warriors who perished in the battles that once raged around the castle. Others say he could be a guard, still walking his rounds centuries after death, bound to the duty he could never abandon. The kitchens, once the heart of the castle, hold another strange story. Workers preparing meals have reported hearing clattering dishes when no one is near. A faint smell of roasting meat has been described, drifting into the hall even when the fires are cold. It is said that servants who toiled here, often under harsh conditions, may have left their essence behind, bound to the place where they spent their lives. Though their presence seems less frightening than others, it is a reminder that ghosts can linger not only from tragedy, but from routine, from the places they knew best. Perhaps the most unnerving tales come from those who have stayed overnight in the castle. Chillingham now allows guests to book rooms within its ancient walls, offering them the chance to spend a night in one of the most haunted places in Britain. Many who take the chance do not sleep peacefully. Guests describe knocks on their doors in the dead of night, shadows passing across their rooms, and the sound of whispers in the darkness. Some report their belongings moved from where they were placed, or sudden cold drafts brushing against their faces as they lie awake. For many, the experience is thrilling, but for others, it is too much to bear. The history of bloodshed at Chillingham is not only tied to its role as a fortress, but also to the relentless border wars between England and Scotland. For centuries, this land was torn apart by conflict, and Chillingham stood as both shield and sword. Raids, skirmishes, and full battles left countless dead around its walls. Each life taken added to the weight of sorrow that still lingers here. Perhaps it is not just individual spirits, but the collective echo of violence itself that gives Chillingham its chilling reputation. Among the most unsettling legends of Chillingham is the tale of the White Pantry Ghost. This apparition is often described as a frail woman, pale and weary, who drifts near the castle's old pantry. Servants once kept the family silver there, locked away for protection, and guards were assigned to watch it through the night. It was during these long vigils that men began to see her. She would appear suddenly, clothed in white, with sorrow written across her face. Sometimes she would beg for water, her voice soft and desperate. When the startled guards tried to respond, she would vanish before their eyes. Later research suggested that a maid may have been poisoned in the castle long ago, her spirit returning to seek relief for a thirst that was never quenched. The Great Hall of the castle is another place where stories abound. Once a space of gathering and feasting, it now carries a heavier tone. Visitors walking across its long stone floor sometimes feel an unseen presence pacing beside them. The air grows colder near the high table, where lords and ladies once dined. Some guests have reported hearing the faint echo of laughter, quickly swallowed by silence, as though the hall itself remembers joy but cannot hold onto it for long. Portraits of stern ancestors line the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow intruders into their world. The library, too, carries a strange reputation. Rows of old books fill the shelves, their spines worn with age. At times, the sound of pages turning can be heard, though no one is reading. Some guests describe a faint rustling, as though invisible hands are searching through the shelves. In the quiet, others have claimed to smell the faint scent of candle wax and ink, as though a long-dead scholar is still lost in his work, unaware that centuries have passed. Perhaps one of the most frightening tales belongs to the King Edward Room, a chamber used for important visitors. Guests who have stayed here describe waking in the middle of the night with the sensation of being watched. Some report the sound of footsteps circling the bed. Others hear faint breathing near their ear. A few have claimed to see the figure of a man leaning over them, his features blurred by darkness, disappearing as soon as they move. The sense of dread is so strong that some guests have chosen to leave the castle in the middle of the night rather than endure it any longer. Beyond the walls, the land surrounding Chillingham is no less haunted. The castle grounds, dotted with ancient trees and old pathways, carry whispers of the past. On moonlit nights, shadowy figures are said to move among the trees, sometimes appearing in groups, as if marching silently through the forest. These sightings have led many to believe that soldiers who perished in the border wars still wander the grounds, forever caught in the cycle of battle. The castle's well is another dark landmark. In times of conflict, water was vital for survival, and many lives revolved around it. Yet legend tells that bodies were sometimes thrown into the well, either to poison the water supply or simply as a means of disposal. Visitors standing near the well sometimes report feeling sudden waves of dread. A few claim to hear faint splashes echoing from the depths, though the water lies still. One chilling tale tells of a woman who leaned over the well to peer inside, only to see not her reflection, but the face of another, pale and hollow-eyed, staring back up at her. It is easy to dismiss some of these stories as tricks of the mind. Old castles creak and groan, shadows shift, and imagination can run wild. Yet there is something about Chillingham that seems to go beyond ordinary superstition. Even seasoned investigators approached the castle with respect, acknowledging the weight of its history and the strange phenomena that occur with unsettling regularity. In one famous investigation, a team of researchers spent the night in the castle, using cameras, microphones, and other equipment to detect signs of the paranormal. They reported unexplained noises, sudden cold spots, and strange orbs of light captured on film. One investigator even described being touched on the arm by a hand that was not there. Skeptics may question such findings, but for those present, the experience left no doubt that something unseen moves through Chillingham's halls. The owners of the castle, aware of its reputation, embraced both the history and the haunting. Tours openly discussed the legends, guiding guests through chambers said to be the most active. Yet even with the stories told in daylight, when night falls and silence descends, the castle takes on a far more unsettling character. Those brave enough to remain after dark often say that the building itself seems to breathe, its walls pulsing with the memory of centuries. What makes Chillingham Castle so haunting is not simply the presence of spirits, but the combination of history and cruelty that surrounds it. This was not a place of quiet living. It was a fortress of war, a house of torture, and a stage for human suffering. Each stone carries echoes of violence, of fear, of desperation. To walk its halls is to step into that collective memory, where the boundary between past and present is fragile, and where the dead seem just as close as the living. The legends of Chillingham Castle are so deeply woven into its history that it is hard to separate fact from folklore. Yet perhaps that is part of the castle's power. The truth, after all, is just as chilling as the ghost stories. This fortress saw centuries of bloodshed. Armies clashed along the borderlands. Prisoners were dragged into its dungeons, and families endured fear and betrayal within its walls. Every shadow, every echo is shaped by that past. And so the stories that linger are not simply inventions of the imagination, but reflections of what truly happened here. Consider the story of the castle's most infamous torturer, said to have worked in the chambers beneath the Great Hall. He was reputedly skilled in methods designed to keep victims alive for as long as possible, drawing out their suffering. Legends tell of his tools, cruel devices now rusted or lost to time, but still whispered about by guides. Those who linger in the torture chamber sometimes say they feel an overwhelming sense of despair, as if the very walls cry out with the memory of those days. Some visitors have been so shaken they refuse to step foot inside again, convinced they could still hear faint screams carried on the air. The atmosphere of Chillingham is what sets it apart from other haunted castles. There is a density in its silence, a weight in its stillness. Walk through its long corridors at night, and you might feel as though you are being followed. The sound of your own steps blending with another pair just out of sight. Candle flames flicker without explanation. Doors creak open on their own, and the faintest hints of voices rise in rooms left empty for centuries. It is as if the castle itself has absorbed the energy of every soul that passed through, and now it releases that energy in strange, unexplainable ways. The Blue Boy, Lady Mary, the Armored Soldier, the Pantry Ghost. Each spirit adds to the layers of Chillingham's story. But the truth is that there are far more presences here than can ever be named. Guests speak of shadows at the edge of vision, of figures glimpsed in mirrors, of soft whispers calling their names. Some report sudden feelings of sorrow so strong that tears well up for no reason, vanishing as quickly as they came. Others experience bursts of anger or panic, as though the emotions of those long dead are suddenly pressed into their hearts. There are even tales of animals reacting to the unseen. Dogs refuse to enter certain rooms, their hackles rising, their growls low and uneasy. Horses in nearby stables have been known to bolt at night, as if startled by something invisible moving across the grounds. For centuries, locals avoided the castle after sunset, warning that it was a place where the living did not walk alone. And yet, despite all this fear, there is also a strange fascination. Visitors are drawn to Chillingham precisely because of its reputation. They want to feel the chill of the dungeon air, to listen for the faint cry of the blue boy, to stand in the torchlit hall where so many once gathered. It is a place where the imagination runs wild, but also where the past is impossible to ignore. In its stones lies the story of centuries, and in its silence lies a reminder of how deeply the human spirit can cling to the world it leaves behind. When you stand within Chillingham Castle, it is difficult not to feel humbled by its history. The wars, the betrayals, the tragedies, all are etched into its foundations. And when you hear the faint creak of a floorboard or the whisper of a voice when no one is near, it becomes easy to believe that the souls who lived and died here are still part of the castle, forever watching, forever waiting. Perhaps the true haunting of Chillingham is not in the apparitions or the strange sounds, but in the weight of memory itself. This was a place of blood and fear, and the echoes of those centuries still cling like shadows in the dark. To visit is to walk hand in hand with the past, to feel the cold touch of history pressing close, and to wonder whether the souls of the departed ever truly let go. So when night falls over Northumberland and the winds sweep across the borderlands, the towers of Chillingham stand tall against the sky, their outlines sharp against the moon. Inside, silence stretches through the halls, broken only by the faintest sounds, footsteps, sighs, whispers. The castle rests, but never sleeps. It waits, as it has for centuries, with its stories of sorrow and its hosts of unseen guests. And if you listen closely enough, perhaps you too will hear the echoes of the bloodiest fortress in England, carried softly through the night. Chillingham Castle is not only a monument to history and a museum of the past, it is also a home, alive and breathing in the present. Unlike many other haunted places that are abandoned ruins or preserved relics, Chillingham remains occupied, lived in, and loved. That is what makes its hauntings feel different. The spirits here do not simply linger in forgotten corridors. They weave themselves into the daily lives of those who stay within the walls. Guests, caretakers, even the family that owns the castle often find themselves part of the story. It is not only about history long gone, but about how the past continues to touch the present, refusing to release its hold. Visitors who book a night in the castle often describe the experience as thrilling, but few are truly prepared for how quickly the atmosphere shifts once the sun sets. During the day, there is a sense of charm, with ivy climbing the walls and sunlight pouring through old windows. But when darkness falls, the castle transforms. The silence grows heavier, the shadows deepen, and each hallway feels like a tunnel into another world. Those who walk alone at night often speak of the peculiar sensation of being observed, as though unseen eyes are tracking every movement. Some laugh nervously and call it imagination. Others leave the castle with the unshakable belief that something followed them through those halls. Guests are encouraged to explore, and many do so with excitement, carrying flashlights as they wander into the oldest sections of the building. In the dungeon, a room that once echoed with screams, the air is said to turn unnaturally cold. Some have felt faint touches brush against their arms, while others claim to hear soft moans in the silence, as though suffering is still replaying itself in the present. One traveler described walking out of the dungeon and feeling as if a hand tried to grasp his shoulder, holding him back. When he turned, there was no one there, yet the sensation stayed with him for days afterward. The bedrooms of the castle are perhaps the most unnerving spaces for those who dare to spend the night. Beds are said to shake gently in the dark, as though unseen hands are tugging at the frame. The covers sometimes shift on their own, sliding down toward the floor. More than one guest has woken to the sound of whispered voices, so close they seemed to rise from the pillow beside them. When they opened their eyes, the room appeared empty, yet the air was charged, thick with the weight of an invisible presence. Even seasoned travelers admit to unease when staying in the King Edward room. Stories of heavy footsteps circling the bed are common, along with sudden bursts of cold air, so sharp they feel like icy fingers brushing across the skin. A few guests have reported that the curtains move on their own, swaying gently though no breeze is present. One visitor claimed she woke to see a shadowy figure leaning over her, its face featureless, but its intent clear. She left the castle before dawn, unwilling to spend another moment inside. Daytime does not guarantee safety either. Those who explore the library speak of the sensation of being watched between the shelves, their attention drawn to particular corners where no one stands. Others say the smell of old candle wax drifts through the air, a reminder of scholars who once read by flickering light centuries ago. The kitchens, too, hold their stories. On quiet afternoons, some visitors hear the faint sound of pots clanging or footsteps pacing the floor, though the rooms are empty. What makes these hauntings so compelling is that they occur in the presence of the living. Guests, owners, and staff all become part of the story. The castle does not allow the spirits to rest in forgotten chambers alone. It brings them into the lives of those who walk its halls today, creating an unbroken chain between past and present. Chillingham is a reminder that ghosts do not always linger in abandoned ruins. Sometimes they share their space with us, refusing to be silent, refusing to fade. Some visitors report the sensation of being watched in rooms where they are entirely alone. The air seems to press in, thick and aware, as if the castle itself is listening. Guides say that many guests describe hearing faint footsteps trailing behind them, soft as if made by bare feet, only for the sound to stop abruptly the moment they turn to look. Sometimes the steps begin again, this time in front of them, leading them onward, almost like an invitation or a warning. The most unnerving part is that these experiences rarely come with any visible ghost. There is no shadow at the corner of the eye, no white figure slipping away into the dark. Instead, it is the sense of company, silent and unseen, that lingers strongest. It feels as though someone who once lived here has simply never left, pacing the same familiar stones night after night. One of the most often spoken of presences is that of the Lady in White. Unlike the aggressive spirits tied to torture chambers or battlefield, she is said to be sorrowful rather than menacing. She has been spotted drifting through the castle halls, her figure faint and delicate, glowing as if woven from mist. Witnesses say she often carries a faint fragrance of old roses, a detail that startles them more than the sight itself. They describe it as an unmistakable perfume, lingering in the air long after her image fades. The Lady in White is believed to be linked to one of the castle's many tragedies. Some believe she was a noblewoman imprisoned within the castle walls, others that she was a servant girl who suffered a cruel fate. Regardless of her true story, she seems to appear when the night is stillest, often near the castle's chapel. Guests who have encountered her speak less of fear and more of an overwhelming sadness, as if her sorrow seeps into them, leaving them thoughtful and quiet long after the sighting. The contrast between her calm presence and the darker hauntings makes Chillingham Castle a place of shifting emotions. Visitors have said that walking its halls feels like turning pages in a ghostly book. One room may be filled with oppressive weight, while another seems touched by gentle melancholy. It is this variety, this unpredictability, that makes people describe the castle not only as haunted, but as alive in its haunting. Another of the castle's lingering spirits is said to be that of a young child. Guests sometimes hear faint crying or giggling when there are no children in the castle. The sound drifts through corridors or comes from behind closed doors. At times, small footsteps are heard running across wooden floors. Some skeptics might brush this off as imagination or tricks of old buildings, yet the reports are so frequent and consistent that it adds another dimension to the castle's restless atmosphere. There's a tale of one guest who stayed overnight in one of the castle's chambers. In the dead of night, she woke to the sensation of a small hand brushing hers as though a child had reached out. Startled, she looked around, but the room was empty. Yet she swore she heard the faintest sound of laughter, soft and fleeting, before the silence swallowed it whole. Even seasoned ghost hunters who arrive prepared for the supernatural admit that Chillingham has a way of catching them off guard. They expect cold spots, distant knocks, or the usual tricks of the unseen. But the castle offers something more personal, more intimate. It does not just create fear. It creates encounters that feel oddly emotional, as if each spirit still clings to its story, reaching out to share it with anyone who dares to listen. One of the strangest accounts tied to the castle is of a ghostly presence known as the Blue Boy. For centuries, visitors and residents spoke of a young boy who would appear in flashes of pale blue light, often in one of the castle's oldest bedrooms. The legend says that his cries could be heard echoing through the thick stone walls just as the clock struck midnight. Witnesses described his sobbing as heart-wrenching, followed by a sudden burst of blue radiance that would fade into silence. For generations, this haunting remained unexplained, frightening guests and fueling whispers that the boy's soul was trapped in an eternal plea for help. The mystery took an even darker turn in the 20th century during renovations. Workmen repairing part of the castle discovered the skeletal remains of a child, still clothed in scraps of blue fabric, hidden within a wall. Alongside him were fragments of rusted iron, suggesting he had been trapped or chained in a cruel imprisonment. After the remains were respectfully laid to rest, the Blue Boy's cries reportedly ceased, yet some guests still swear they see flickers of blue light, brief but undeniable, in the same room. It is as though his spirit was freed from torment, but his memory lingers like a soft afterglow, a reminder of the pain once endured within these walls. Other spirits have proven less merciful. Visitors frequently report being touched, brushed against, or even shoved while exploring certain chambers. The sensation is often sudden, an invisible hand pressing on a shoulder or a cold grip brushing past the skin. Some describe their clothes being tugged lightly, as though a spirit's trying to get their attention. In one unnerving account, a man claimed that something unseen yanked his sleeve so forcefully he stumbled forward, convinced that he was not welcome in the space he occupied. The castle's great hall, once a place of feasts and gatherings, carries a very different energy at night. Guests have heard the faint clatter of cutlery or the ghostly hum of voices, like a banquet long past, still echoing in the stones. Others have spoken of sudden cold gusts, sweeping across the room even when the air outside is still. On more than one occasion, witnesses claim they saw ghostly figures seated at the long tables, frozen in a silent feast that dissolved before their eyes. In the courtyard, shadows seem to move of their own accord. Lantern lights flicker strangely, and at times visitors describe hearing the faint clang of armor, as if long dead knights are still patrolling their posts. Dogs are particularly sensitive to this energy. Locals often tell how animals react strangely when brought near the castle. Ears flat, tails between their legs, growling at corners where nothing is visible. It is said that dogs can see what humans cannot, and their unease only adds weight to the belief that Chillingham remains filled with the echoes of its violent history. But perhaps what unsettles most visitors is not the dramatic sightings, but the subtler experiences. Guests often report leaving the castle with a lingering heaviness, as if they've carried something away with them. Dreams filled with shadowy figures, sudden feelings of dread weeks after a visit, or the persistent memory of being watched. These are the kind of hauntings that do not end when the castle gates close behind you. Some say Chillingham imprints itself on anyone who dares to walk its halls, carrying its history into their very thoughts. For those sensitive to energy, the castle's chapel is often the most profound experience. Once a place of prayer and solace, it now carries an air of spiritual unrest. Visitors kneeling in its pews have spoken of whispers brushing their ears, voices they cannot understand. Some have felt an icy hand rest gently on their shoulder, as though a spirit longs for acknowledgement. Others have reported overwhelming waves of sadness, tears rising without reason, as though the grief of centuries is still stored in the stones themselves. The chapel is also home to unexplained lights. Glimmers of white orbs have been seen floating above the altar, flickering like candles before vanishing. Skeptics might call it a trick of the eye, yet too many accounts speak of these lights moving with deliberate grace, sometimes drifting toward visitors before disappearing in an instant. It feels less like random energy and more like a message, though one left forever unspoken. Chillingham Castle's living hauntings are not about jump scares or loud terrors. They are quiet, insistent, and deeply personal. They tug at emotions, stir memories, and remind us that history is not dead. The walls breathe with sorrow, longing, and restless energy. Every creak of the wood, every breath of cold air feels less like a building settling and more like the presence of something unseen reminding you that you are never truly alone within its halls. One of the most chilling reports comes from overnight guests who stay within the castle's chambers. Many speak of waking suddenly at around 3 a.m, gripped by the distinct sense of another presence in the room. Some describe hearing the sound of heavy breathing close to their ear, only to find no one there. Others tell of shadows standing at the foot of their beds, watching silently until they dissolve into the darkness. These encounters rarely leave behind physical evidence, but the emotional impact is lasting, with guests leaving the castle convinced they had been observed by something that does not rest. The tapestry room is among the most frequently mentioned places of activity. In this room, the fabric of centuries hangs heavily from the walls, adorned with faded patterns and stories long forgotten. Yet visitors say the room never feels entirely empty. Several accounts describe figures moving just behind the layers of tapestry, as though people walk in hidden corridors only the spirits can access. On more than one occasion, guests swore they saw the woven fabric shift slightly, as though brushed from behind by unseen hands. For many, it is a reminder that Chillingham is a place where even the walls themselves seem to hold secrets. Some encounters have been less quiet, bordering on violent. A few visitors have reported being scratched by unseen forces. One woman described leaving the castle with 3 deep marks across her arm, appearing in moments while she was touring the great hall. Others recount sudden pains, sharp, fleeting sensations in their backs or necks, gone as quickly as they came. These experiences have caused debates among paranormal researchers, with some claiming that Chillingham is home to spirits strong enough to cross into the physical realm, while others argue that the intense atmosphere amplifies the imagination. The dungeon, though often associated with older tales of suffering, is still said to radiate the strongest energy of all. People who enter describe overwhelming nausea, dizziness, and a suffocating heaviness. Some cannot last more than a few minutes inside. Tour guides often remark that it is as if the cries of the tortured seeped so deeply into the stone that they never faded. Guests sometimes report hearing distant moans or chains rattling, even when the chamber is completely empty. For those who are sensitive, the dungeon feels less like a ruin and more like a wound that never truly healed. Outside the castle walls, the grounds themselves seem restless. The gardens, serene in daylight, shift after sunset. Visitors walking the pathways at night claim to hear voices carried on the wind, sometimes sounding like conversations just out of reach. Others have seen misty figures drifting along the hedges, vanishing as quickly as they appear. There are stories of riders on phantom horses seen charging across the lawns, their armor glinting faintly before fading into the darkness. The land remembers as much as the castle does, keeping echoes of centuries alive in ways that defy explanation. Chillingham's staff, many of whom have worked within the castle for years, share their own stories quietly, often with a knowing smile. They speak of lights switching on and off with no cause, doors opening when firmly locked, and objects shifting when no one is near. Some employees say they have grown accustomed to these happenings, treating the castle's ghosts as co-workers rather than intruders. Yet even they admit that certain nights feel heavier, as if the spirits are more awake, more insistent on making themselves known. What sets Chillingham Castle apart from other haunted places is the range of its hauntings. It is not a single spirit, not a single tragedy replayed in echoes. It is a multitude of voices layered across time, each with its own story, each lingering in its own way. Some spirits cling to sorrow, others to anger, and still others to moments of joy long lost. The castle does not just hold hauntings, it embodies them, alive with centuries of restless energy. Perhaps that is why those who leave Chillingham often say the castle stays with them. They remember the weight of its silence, the flicker of its shadows, the strange dreams that follow in the nights after their visit. The hauntings are not confined to its stone walls. They travel in memory, carried by everyone who has felt them. In this way, the spirits of Chillingham Castle are never truly alone. They remain in the stories retold, in the shiver down a spine, in the whispered recollections shared in hushed voices long after the visit has ended. Chillingham Castle's living hauntings remind us that history does not die quietly. It lingers, it breathes, it reaches out through time. And in the quiet of its halls, if you listen closely, you may just hear it calling.